Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Vice President Venkaiah Naidu returned to the national capital on Thursday morning after concluding his visit to three Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. During his visit, the Vice President expanded India's outreach in the region, with all the three countries agreeing to support India's claim for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. The Vice President held wide-ranging talks with the heads of all three nations and addressed business forums and the Indian diaspora. Appreciating Estonia's e-residency scheme, which has facilitated about 2,200 Indians to become e-residents of Estonia, he said it would enable Indian companies and entrepreneurs to use Estonia as a launchpad for entering the Baltic, Nordic and European markets. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze India's ties with the Baltic states. Joining me on the program today are Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador, Sheetal Sharma, assistant professor, Center for European Studies, JNU, and Simran Sori, foreign affairs journalist. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. The key takeaways for you from the Vice President's visit to the Baltic states?
A couple of things, Frank. First of all, ever since the countries became independent after the disintegration of Soviet Union in 1991, and we established diplomatic ties with all three of them in the early 1990s. This was the highest level ever visit from India to these countries. Now, of course, from these countries, whether it is from Latvia or Lithuania, we've had the visits of their presidents, we've had the visits of their prime ministers and several other ministers. From Estonia, the highest level visit to India has been that of the foreign minister. While on the other hand, from our side, it has basically been, very late in the day, 2016, we had Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad as the Minister of IT who visited there, and otherwise there have been ministers of state who have been going there. So I think there was a huge imbalance in terms of, incoming visits and outgoing visits. So in that sense, it was a very good visit. Taking the same theme forward, this is also the outreach policy that the current Modi government has utilized, that not only focusing on large countries, on big countries with whom we have already vibrant and dynamic relations, but also reaching out to all countries that are there, whether big, small, as I think has been mentioned by several, that all these countries who are members of the United Nations, they have a single vote in the UN system.
So the size doesn't matter.
The size doesn't matter. Absolutely. Absolutely. Even in 2015, when he visited, I remember Mongolia, again, no Indian Prime Minister had gone there. So, he is also reaching out, and the President and the Vice President have also been reaching out. So in that sense, it was a very good visit, and I could see, I've interacted with all the three ambassadors before they left for the Vice President's visit. All of them are extremely excited and very happy that India, they're getting a recognition from India and sending, he's the second person in the Indian hierarchy who's going there. So they are all excited, and you could see the body language wherever the president went, vice president went, in Latvia and Lithuania, Estonia. He met the president, he met the prime minister, he met the speaker of the parliament. So all the top leadership was there for him. So I think number one is this takeaway, that very significant diplomatic takeaway that we have strengthened our relations with all these three countries in the political context. Now, coming to some of the other takeaways, culturally these countries are all very close to India, whether it is in terms of Indian dance, music or language, for instance, Sanskrit. It is mentioned that both Sanskrit and Lithuanian, for instance, there are 10,000 common words which are very similar to each other. They've been able to find out about 108 of them, so doing some work to find out all the rest. Even with the Latvian language, there are a large number. There's a great convergence as far as language is concerned. Ayurveda is extremely popular in Latvia. I was concurrently accredited to Latvia for when I was ambassador to Sweden. So there is a huge possibility in the area of culture, likewise in Estonia. But looking forward, as you'd mentioned in your presentation, there are a large number of areas, and I would say in terms of high technology, artificial intelligence, e-governance, because Skype seems to have emanated from Estonia. So although it's a small country in terms of area, all these countries are very, very small.
Right.
You know, and in population even smaller. So
Sure.
there are those asymmetries, but there are lots of possibilities in terms of cooperation, collaboration going forward.
And they can punch above their weight is what you're
Absolutely.
suggesting. All right, we'll come to that in just a bit. Looking forward, what is it that we need to focus on? But Sheetal Sharma, there's very little known about these Baltic states when you look at the other European countries. You know, a lot of concentration is on France, Germany, the UK, Italy maybe, and you know, some of those other countries. But as far as the Baltic nations are concerned, there's very little known about these nations. So just put into perspective and let us understand what is the strength of these Baltic states and how can we cooperate with each other?
Frank, when we talk about the continental Europe and the landmass, we actually can see some regions within it, say Western Europe, Nordics, Central Europe, Eastern Europe and Baltic countries. Now, somehow or the other, our focus has always remained, you know, concentrated towards the Western European countries and big powers such as UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain and all these countries. Now, when we look at these regions, they got their independence after fall of Berlin Wall, and these countries, once again, Central European and Baltic countries, they have a different dynamics of, you know, a smaller regional weight also, and at the same time, you know, a kind of image, say Baltics as three countries together. Now, when we talk about this particular visit and how do we see it vis-a-vis the other regions in Europe, this is another chapter that we can say has been added in the book of cultural diplomacy. Because there is not much in terms of trade volume between Baltic countries and India, and also in terms of, say, what strategic areas we can collaborate with each other, say in terms of defense, in terms of security. Because the smaller countries, small area, small geography, small population, Estonia has only 1.3 million people. So how do we collaborate with them? So we can think about certain areas in cultural diplomacy where we can think of engagement, relationships, enhancing it to the next level. And what are these areas? As Ambassador Saab has already mentioned some of these areas in terms of e-governance, e-security, or we can talk of cultural linkages, languages as the common areas where we can collaborate. Educational areas. These are the areas in which we can look forward to come in close relationship with these countries. But at the same time, this particular visit indicates a kind of, you know, bringing in vibrancy into the existing relationship. The conduits are there, but there is lesser fuel running into these. And again, I would like to bring to your notice that we had an event in which the Polish people were there, and there has been a kind of, you know, yearning from these countries that yes, we need somebody to, you know, pay attention from Indian side, because Indian attention has always been concentrated towards the west side, you know, the left part of the European continent. So they are looking forward to. And India is such a big country, you can call it as a market for them or not, but at least India has its weight, and these countries, as we were discussing, that everybody has a single weight despite its size or shape. So they are good countries to support us in many of the international forums.
Absolutely.
So what I see is a step further, enhancing our level of association a bit higher in the scale. And yes, there are areas of cooperation, and we need to focus more on the Central European, the Eastern European and Baltic countries in order to enhance and mobilize our support in the European continent.
Absolutely. And Simran Soli, I'm going to go back to a point that the ambassador was making about, you know, the outreach policy under the present government and how it has taken shape and why it is important to reach out to some of the smaller countries as well and how they are important.
I think what Ambassador Sajjanhar is saying is absolutely correct. What we have seen in the Modi 1 regime and a continuation of it we see in the Modi 2 regime. Basically, we have also been very focused on the neighborhood first policy, the look east policy or the act east policy. What we have seen with the Vice President's visit to the 3 Baltic states is the fact that India is looking beyond the present neighborhood, then you go a little beyond the neighborhood, you go to Southeast Asia. Now we are actually also talking about countries which usually we never did. Countries which are in the Baltic, Estonia and all. People in India also do not know too much about it. Diplomatically also the outreach has not been so great. But we see what was started in 2014 continues in 2019 with a very clear direction that we will reach out not only to the bigger countries or the countries in the neighborhood or our relationship with China, but we will also work, and the focus will be on building relationship with smaller nations. And as Ambassador Sajjanhar pointed out, that each of these countries that the Vice President has visited has committed that they support India for a permanent seat on the UNSC, and that is something we have been going about for a very long time. We have been trying to convince the bigger nations. The idea also is that if everyone has one vote and we have the smaller states but they have an equal voice on the table and they say we are willing to support India and India is important and India deserves the table, it also puts a pressure on the bigger nations like China, for instance, or even some countries like France, which do support us, but it always adds value to India's stature that even smaller states today are feeling that India deserves a stage and it deserves a table on the global platform.
Absolutely, absolutely. Taking the discussion forward now, Ambassador, as far as the Baltic states are concerned, what is it that we need to focus on going forward? What are the areas or the sectors that need special attention, do you think?
Yeah, Frank, if you permit, exactly what Simran was just mentioning, that there are these countries with whom all these countries we can really work towards that. There is a convergence of values. All these three countries are democracies, they are pluralistic, there's rule of law, there's freedom of press, and that is something, which we have in common with all these countries. Now, in terms of areas where all these countries have their specific strengths, where they can work. For instance, as I was mentioning earlier about Estonia, it is extremely, it's a world leader in technology. It's a world leader as far as artificial intelligence is concerned. So even the number of agreements, that we have signed with Estonia, it's on e-governance and on cyber security. We have not been able to connect so well with these countries, although there is so much in commonality, whether it is culture or it is value systems, because of the geographical distance. But when you are talking about technology, when you are talking about digitization, then geography ceases to matter, and then the countries can really collaborate. And these are the areas where these countries have proven strengths. As far as Latvia is concerned, for instance, in the area of logistics, we have been talking so much about the international north-south transport corridor, and that goes through Iran and through Russia, and that can really, Latvia can really serve as the entrepot for India as far as the rest of Europe is concerned. As I said, I was there, I have seen the Riga port. Although it is situated there in the Baltic Sea, but it is ice-free. It never freezes during winters. So it can be utilized for taking our products and goods. If we were to go via the Suez all the way, it would be about 16,000 kilometers, while going by the INSTC, International North-South Transport Corridor, going through Latvia to other places, to the Nordics and other places in Europe, it would be just about 6,000 kilometers. So, it reduces time, it reduces cost, it is more efficient in that sense. As far as Lithuania is concerned, there also, whether it is pharma, it is agricultural technology, it is food processing, there are a large number of areas which present themselves for working together. So I think when the Vice President was there, as you mentioned, he addressed the business forums in all these countries. There is also a decent Indian community, small but active, decent community, Indian community. So he was able to interact with them. There was a business delegation which went with him from ASSOCHAM, from the CII. So they have explored possibilities and opportunities. Another area that I would say which does lend itself to good cooperation between all of these is education. There are increasing number of students from India that are going to study there, and they have excellent facilities. I remember in Latvia at the moment I am told that there are 2,000 Indian students who are there. And if you look at, if you were just to compare that with what we have in France, the Prime Minister is there today, he went there yesterday. And there are about 10,000 Indian students in France. Now the relationship with France is much older. So just a comparison, a small country here, Latvia, that houses 2,000 students, and the possibility, the potential is much greater. There is about 1,000 students in Lithuania. As far as trade also is concerned, if you look at Estonia, we have about $180 million. With Lithuania about $300 odd million, similar about $180 to $200 million with Latvia, but these are all far below potential.
Absolutely.
And investments into India, because India is a huge market, so they can come, the companies, businesses from Baltic states can come into India in all these sectors, whether it is e-governance, digitization, renewable energy. That is another area in which they have proven strengths. So I guess, there is a huge lot on the table, and we can work on several of those to strengthen cooperation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, that having been said, Sheetal Sharma, trade, like the ambassador pointed out, is a problem area really, or an area that needs special attention. What needs to be done in the immediate near future and in the long term, do you think, so as to ensure that we can boost trade with these countries?
Frank, there is a possibility, in terms of when we talk about making the relationships robust or infusing energy in the relationship between two nations or with this particular region. Trade is one. Now, how do you do it? When we talk about people-to-people contact or talk about cultural diplomacy, the visibility factor is very important. How do you make somebody, visible in your society, in your domain of things? And this is how then the traffic flows from one side or the other. Now, as we talk about education is one such sector where we can have, number of students going from India studying there. These countries have to come up with kind of educational fairs and making the kind of programs that they are offering, exchange of faculty, exchange of student programs, and, a kind of making them here present imprints on the Indian psyche among the students. There is hospitality sector in which we can always see, there is a potential of both of us utilizing our capacities, individual capacities, and helping each other. Then to add to it, we can also have, some kind of relationship in learning from each other in terms of the best practice models. Particularly if I talk about gender equity indexes, and these countries fare far better as we, in terms of ranking in the gender equity parity index as compared to India. So what kind of environment these people are offering to women in order to overcome those inequality in terms of jobs, in terms of wage, in terms of, providing conducive environment for women to return to work, these are one of couple of dimensions which are related to gender equality. So what can be done? What can we learn from them? What they can learn from us? These are soft areas of connection, soft areas of exchanging information and knowledge with each other. So one important thing is that with big countries, we have so much of exposure, diaspora is there, remittances are coming, people are going from this side and that side. There is constant flow of people from both the sides. So they are more visible and have a greater image on Indian psyche. One another area which can be explored, which has a very great potential in terms of leaving an imprint or image on Indian psyche is Bollywood. Because Central and Eastern European countries, West was always explored. Polish, Austria, Czech, all these countries are now coming up on the radar of Bollywood, and there are constant, shooting of films in these areas. There is potential to explore these because these are scenic, these are serene, unexplored, untapped potential. So how can Bollywood venture into it? They can bring it back to India. So these are the soft areas, the ways in which we can connect more with people of these region, and then possibly bring something back to India.
Absolutely. So Simran Sodhi, is the ISA a good start really, the International Solar Alliance, where we can, come together, the Baltic region and India, and then take the relationship forward?
I think it's an excellent platform. One, because the ISA is an initiative which was jointly done by our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, and the French leader, Macron. And I think the world is in the need of a of an initiative like the ISA. We've seen what is happening in Brazil, the fires in the Amazon, and we have seen that climate change is a real problem to the world today. So I think one, it's an excellent platform because this is an initiative which has been taken by our own Prime Minister, and this also puts India in a leadership position. We've also seen simultaneously what is happening with the United States President Donald Trump. He is going back from a lot of world challenges to the extent where he has referred to climate change as a hoax. So when you have the world's existing superpower not wanting to tackle climate change, you have countries like India and France jointly stepping in to fill that vacuum. And the fact that the ISA today offers us a platform to connect with the Baltic states is an excellent opportunity for India to bond with these states and bring them on board for projects that are in the future, because we have seen that the ISA is not only getting projects which are countries which are not having oil, for example. Saudi Arabia has majorly invested in ISA. They are on board with India on this. So this brings the world together. This gives India an opportunity to interact and forge deeper ties with the Baltic states. And I think most importantly, it puts India and it puts our Prime Minister in the leadership position, primarily also because the world today doesn't really have someone who's willing to stand up and say that fine, Donald Trump doesn't want to do this, so who else will do this? So if we are willing to do it and our country and our Prime Minister is filling that vacuum and we are forging ties, I think it's an excellent, excellent platform.
Absolutely. All right, closing comments now from all my guests. Ambassador, what about connectivity and tourism?
Connectivity tourism is extremely, has great potential, because I think we can see that all these three states are now receiving much larger number of Indian tourists. And as you mentioned yourself and as the other panelists also mentioned, that this is an area that is totally unexplored, unknown. And I think as far as Indians are concerned, because as the levels of prosperity is growing, as the middle class is growing, so they want to move away from, the usual tourist places like, Southeast Asia, Thailand and so on and so forth. And they want to explore something new. So I think there is a good possibility there. In terms of connectivity also, we are getting better. Next month, we are going to have a direct flight from here to Poland. And from Poland to connectivity to these places is very good. We have direct connection from here to Finland. Finnair flies, and from there again getting to these countries is very, very easy. And as far as visas are concerned, that also all these countries can get e-visas to come to India. So I think getting tourists into India, although as we mentioned, the population of these countries is very small. It's about 2.5 million for Latvia and Lithuania and less than 2 million for Estonia. So populations are small, but still I think it is in terms of possibilities, because when we have more people-to-people contact, more business contact, I think they'll be able also to find out what are the commercial possibilities, what are the business potential of coming to India.
Sure.
I have the floor. If you permit, I'll just mention one or two additional points. One is, Frank, that what I found, that these countries, and I've traveled to all three of them quite extensively, that these countries can really prove to be good interlocutors for India as far as the European Union is concerned. Many of the issues that we have with the European Union, for instance, the bilateral trade and investment agreement, that is something that has been hanging fire since 2007. Now, for these countries, it would be much more beneficial if there is the bilateral free trade agreement. And in that context, these countries, as also the Nordics, can really speak on behalf of India, so to say.
Right.
The second point is in terms of cooperation in the UN Security Council. Estonia becomes a member of the UN Security Council next year, and this was underlined during the Vice President's visit, that both of us will cooperate, and Estonia has said that they are going to support our candidature for a non-permanent seat in 2021. So I think there also we can do. And the last point that I would like to say is, all these three countries have embassies in India. India does not have an embassy in either of these three. So going forward, we need to really look at that how can we have a diplomatic presence, because all these three countries are represented concurrently represented from other countries
Sure.
in the vicinity. So how can we at least in one of the countries, maybe in Lithuania, because that is the largest of them, but then also seeing geographically which is the most centrally placed, put our embassy there so that we can give a further impetus and fillip to our growing cooperation.
Absolutely. And Sheetal Sharma, what's the best way forward?
First is to enhance the flow of people from both the sides. Number two, to make use of all the tools existing of conventional diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, people-to-people contact. Number three, enhance the level of visibility of both the sides into each other. Number four, along with the big ticket projects of energy security and cyber security and all of those other things and trade, we need to identify the niche areas, the small areas which are far more effective and touch the lives of the people and find solutions to the existing problems which India has, such as urbanization or infrastructure or things which actually matter to people in everyday life in India. Collaborate at all the levels, state to state level, civil society to civil society, university to university, and in whatever sector of hospitality, tourism, and what all things are existing. So we have to tap the potential existing in various areas, various spheres, various activities and levels. This will happen only if there is a greater exchange in the future and a coordinated planning that how do we bring into practice all these things which we have discussed just now.
Absolutely. And Simran Sodhi, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think the Vice President's visit to the Baltic states is an excellent step forward. These states are not usually talked about when we talk of foreign policy in India, but I think it's a continuation of the Prime Minister's foreign affairs policy, where he feels that we have to reach out to every nation state in the world, big or small, and I think ultimately this will help India not in just getting a permanent seat in the UNSC, but also establish us as a global leader, which is having good relations with big states, but also the smaller states. And I think that's the hallmark of any leader in the world or any country which is wanting to take a leadership position.
Absolutely. A good start has been made. It remains to be seen how we build on this foundation and take the relationship forward is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me, but we'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com, and you can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it on this edition of India's World. See you again next time.